Awesome. So now I've got verbal programming down, which is phenomenal. We're gonna move on to now is sort of the second most influential kind programming, and one of the really core foundational keys here, which is modeling, right? This idea of behavior. And you know, when you think about like what you grew up around, what you grew up with, for most people, you know, there's like the 1%, and maybe 1% of people watching this grew up in the 1%, but for the other like 99%, most people, you kind of grow up around sort of a normal environment. And even if you don't, you grow up around behaviors that maybe aren't the best condoned to creating, you know, it depends obviously on what your goals are, but maybe towards creating, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, wherever it is you want to go to. For most people I know, and myself included, like I didn't grow up around people that were like where I want to be, and I had to surround myself with those people. And because of that, there were a lot of these modeling beliefs and a lot of these that when I grew up, like my parents, my guardians, my friends, when I was surrounded by sort of how they manage their money. And again, we're coming back to this core concept of money management, which is literally the most valuable skill you can have, money management. Because once you understand how to multiply your money, which you're gonna learn through the implementation coaching program, like you can literally write your own paycheck every single week for the rest of your life. No matter how many hours you put into the day, you know, you buy any asset and it pays you, like it doesn't matter how much work you put in, you don't have to be doing things if you just have assets, you know? You put a couple million into something that pays a dividend, and you know, you never have to work again. And that's one of the really powerful things you can do once you master the insane power. Financial assets, also business assets, cryptocurrency. I mean, this is just everything we teach, right? And so, because of that, you kind of want to think about, like, you know, were people spenders, or were you growing up around spenders, or were you growing up around savers? Now, neither of these really have an impact on the amount of, you know, investment return that you achieve, but it's a really, really big differentiation, right? I grew up around savers. Now, a lot of people, they grow up around spenders. And what's interesting is, the reason I grew up around savers is because I mentally surrounded myself, and through my social group, with people that are a little bit more conservative, a little bit more like save your money. My brother, on the other hand, grew up in the exact same household as me, and he surrounded himself with people that were a little bit more spenders, a little bit more outgoing. And so because of that, my brother, he doesn't really have as much money saved, and you know, he'll listen to me scream at him all day about, bro, you gotta invest in stock, this is the coolest thing on the planet. But instead, a lot of this goes out the door for him. It goes towards liabilities, it goes towards clothes, it goes towards things that aren't really, you know, they don't matter. Versus people that are saving a lot of their money, and instead of having it go out the door, they're sort of, you know, growing it to become more for them by investing it in assets, right? But assets are kind of like, you know, they're down here, and they're like this whole different thing, right? So the assets are sort of separated from the rest of it, and the important differentiator here is spending versus saving. Like, who did you grow up around? You know, the people, were they, when you grew up around, or the friends you have, were they like phenomenal investors? Or maybe did they never invest in their life? They didn't have any assets. You know, start to question, like, did they have assets? Were they saving, you know, a bunch of money? The difference is really critical. Once you understand sort of what you're used to, you know, are you used to being risky, or are you used to being sort of conservative, right? It depends, right? If you surround yourself and you grow up around people that run Indian casinos every single day, the entire time you grow up, and you grow up working in the Indian casinos or whatever, you know, it might sound silly, but there are literally people that grow up in casinos, and because of that, they're constantly surrounded by risky spending behavior, and because of that, they have a really, really, really difficult time later in life creating savings, creating, you know, quality investments. Whether or not they're, you know, conservative or aggressive investments is another topic, but the important thing is understanding, you know, obviously once you learn how to invest really well, you're sort of going to be able to create a ton of upside with a lot of very, very minimal downside. And so I think, you know, we're going to talk about this a lot when we get into investing, but conservative versus risky investing all kind of comes down to your skills. It comes down to your ability to actually understand how stocks are going to move and then accurately predict those movements. Like, I think, you know, a lot of people, they see what I do and they're like, oh, you have hundreds of % gains, that must be super risky. But like, if I completely understand my downside in every position I take, and I drastically put all my efforts towards limiting that, like, is that really risky, or is that more conservative if I know what the hell I'm doing? Like, and that's what I want to share with you is how to actually do things. But things that are risky is like stupid stuff. Like, you know, let's put, I remember, this has been one of the just craziest weeks that I've personally ever seen. I have clients this week that, like, it's just been insane. So much money this week. I remember this one guy turned probably 100 grand into like $8 million in the last week and a half. So the guy turned like $4 into like 40. It's just been 40 grand, I think. It was really a crazy week with Tesla. It's just been oh my gosh, insane. And I remember a couple days ago, you know, this stock is hitting its all-time high. It's at the peak of the peak. It is so radically, it's insane. And like all I'm doing is buying puts. Like it's and you're buying puts, and everyone's selling, and everyone's selling their calls, and they're like cashing out, making tons of money. And while the smart investors are kind of getting out, more people bought their first stock on Robinhood in Tesla. About 100,020 people bought their first stock ever on Robinhood in Tesla at that exact same moment. They bought literally the riskiest investment you could ever make, because there was some speculative news that it was going to go from $1,000 to $7,000. And if you've ever experienced any kind of bubble, or if you've gone through any of the educational courses that you'll probably get more access to once you go through this program, you're going to understand sort of how to find bubbles and how to find peaks and emotions and stuff like that, and how to predict market tops, and, you know, how I knew that, like, that was the day that you freaking short the hell out of it. Like, just to give you guys a spoiler, is because everyone was selling total joke options calls at $1,000 when it was at $500, and then those calls went up by a factor of 100 or so, and you know it's not going to hit that strike, and you have to sell. And if those words that I just said didn't make sense, don't worry about it. There's a whole options masterclass you guys are going to get access to later on in the coaching program. Not a big deal, but sort of the big differentiator and the big shift for these guys was like everyone that's smart knows what they're doing is getting out. But the people and those were all the savers, right? Those were the smart savers, right? But over here you have sort of people that are like risk, you know, spend, and they literally they bought, like, you know, got what, like 1,200 people after $1,000. I mean, you're spending millions, tens of millions, hundreds of $1 millions getting poured into this stock with people that are buying it for the first time ever in the hopes that it's gonna keep on going. It's gonna burst through and be the craziest investment ever. It's gonna have tons of returns. And they don't look at the downside at all. And then, everyone sells. The next day it opens down 15%. The next day it opens down, you know, another 5%. Or it opens up 15%. Now it's gonna go down, up, and down, and down. It's this huge, like, parabolic movement. And people lost, you know, 10%, 15%. It's a good chunk of change. I know a lot of my cousin or my aunt, she has tons of stock in Tesla. Like, literally, I think about a third of her portfolio is in Tesla. Maybe it was half. I think it might have been about half. And because of that, her portfolio value has basically doubled over the past couple of, you know, months or so. And I'm like, yo, you've got to sell at like $960, $950, whatever, or these really high prices. And they're like, nah, don't worry about it. And I'm like, dude, just do a partial sell at least. And they're like, nah, don't worry about it. And then, you know, it tanks. And it's like, you know, like, a lot of people have this idea of like, oh, well, you know, you should invest in the long term and you should buy a stock and hold it for like 15 years. And like, you know, yes, that's I mean, that's good, that's great, especially if in like, that's smart. But if you know for a fact that, you know, this is the top and tomorrow it's gonna go down 20%, like, there's no reason to lose money, you know? It just doesn't make any sense. And so a lot of people, they grow up around individuals, maybe you don't understand this concept, maybe they don't understand technical analysis, they don't understand outperforming investments, and they're just spending, making risky choices with their money. And because of that, they're living paycheck to paycheck. Because of that, their bank account has less than, you know, 5, 6, 7 figures in it. Because of that, they don't have quality assets. And a lot of people see that as the norm. And so what you want to do is you want to sort of recognize that, and because actions speak a lot louder than words. And if you're constantly surrounded with negative actions, like, you need to get rid of those negative actions and instead surround yourself with quality positive actions, like making really sustainable quality investments and having, like, following your budget, following what we set out earlier on with having an actual plan for saving and investing. And I mean, it's not that freaking tough. It's pretty simple once you know what to do. Once you have a formula, once you have a game plan, once you have a plan to get to that result. And so that's kind of the core here, is you need to separate yourself from individuals who don't know what they're doing. You need to separate yourself from those who are just going about it in a nonchalant, unplanned, and really, non-strategic way. And instead focus on the growth. Instead focus on the development to actually get to that next level of success. That's kind of the big mindset shift here. And Eckhart kind of realized this when he was growing up. And for him, he was thinking like, was money consistently there? Like when you're growing up, is money always there? Or was the flow kind of sporadic, right? Did money come easily? Or was it always a struggle? Was money a source of joy? Or was it the cause of bitter arguments? I remember I was probably like 9 or 10, because my dad left when I was like 11 or 12. And I remember all these just awful arguments about money, especially kind of when the restaurant was like getting to its brink and then closing. And it was really bad. And I think back at that, at least I used to think back at that, and I was like, wow, like who would want to deal with money? That's such a terrible thing. And look at all this argument, all this negativity that it caused. And I think that's probably why I didn't start investing until, I was a little bit older, and I spent I probably spent like 3-4 years of my life just doing nothing but playing video games. And I sort of got to like really great. Like I would literally play like national tournaments. I was top 500 NA in like Overwatch, Team Fortress, and like all I would do is, because for me, like I made no money doing that, like at all. But it was a way to avoid the concept of money. It was a way to avoid the responsibility of managing my wealth, because I wouldn't say how much to start with, but because of those negative arguments that I saw over and over again about delegation and responsibility and cash flow, that sort of put this negative spin on me growing up, thinking like, oh wow, I don't want to have to deal with money. That's such a hard thing and negative thing. And for me, like, it was kind of tough to overcome that. And sort of about a year working a minimum wage job, because for me, you make like 10 grand, and it's like, wow, that's an abundance of money. That's an abundance of cash. And for, a kid, it's like, that's cool, right? And that abundance, and only once I had that abundance, and only once I felt that there was no scarcity of resources whatsoever in my life, did I actually get over that. Because I didn't really understand the framework that I'm sharing with you right now. I never really understood this concept. I definitely had not read this book when I was that age. If you read this, you're gonna be like a light year ahead of everybody. It's insane. But anyway, it kind of just happened accidentally, where I finally started to realize that I could take responsibility for myself, and I could actually create the results I wanted in my life. And so it's really important that you think about the actions that you've been surrounded with. Think about the actions that have led to really the frame that you have around the cash and the investable capital that you sort of manage. Because once you understand that, you can start to sort of shift it, just like the exercise we did with verbal arguments, showing you the exact same thing that you did in verbal with active modeling behavior. Sort of overcome those, right? And that information is really critical. It's like what you see, like usually you will do, unless you make a conscious decision to be more, to do more, to be different, and to achieve more. Because that's really the shift. And we learn almost everything, especially when we're kids, like growing up, through modeling. And so if you grew up maybe in a more negative, maybe in a more positive, like it'd be phenomenal if you grew up constantly seeing people like happy about money, and just saving and being smart, and like if that's you, that's phenomenal. That definitely was not me. There's a lot of it was just a lot of bad emotions surrounded money in my family. And so if that's you, like understand that doesn't have to be the way it is. That doesn't have to be the path. And if you're surrounded with great emotions, that's phenomenal. Stick with it, and then that'll be sort of the path that you want to follow. But either way, you want to constantly be looking towards this greater future where you have money not as a challenge, but instead as an opportunity, instead as a multiplier, instead as something to be joyful for and grateful for and happy about, to get to that ideal future state where you're living in constant, perpetual abundance with sort of the investments you make and the assets that you create, which is really, really, really powerful. I think kind of the best way to explain this is a story that Eckhart tells. That once I heard the story, I've never forgotten this story. It's been one of the biggest game changers that I've ever had. This really is totally changed everything for me once I understood the concept behind this story. I mean, it's just so massive, and it empowered me to actually question the beliefs that I had and to think about what would be the best way for me to invest, what would be the best way for me to trade, what would be the best way to sort of shift that game set of portfolio diversification, allocation. Almost everything I do all kind of came from this one mindset shift. And it all comes down to this concept of like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and stuff like that. And so if you've got like this tree, and you grow it up and you have like, apples everywhere, what I want to do, sort of through the rest of this class and through the coaching program, is I want to make it so that you don't have to be just an apple that's falling on the ground and sitting next to this tree and it's growing up just like, your past. Because for most of you guys, myself included, like my past did not have a lot of money in it. And so instead, if you have this goal of like making tons and tons and tons of money, what do you want to do, right? What do you have to do? You have to sort of, what I want to do is I want to build up this slide so that you can fall onto this slide as an apple, and instead of landing with everybody else, you go all the way over here to the abundant. Like this is where you want to be, right? Whatever that goal is for you, whatever that amount of money, whatever the growth is that'll get you the end result you want, like that's all you have to do. It's just by building up this foundation. And so here's kind of the story, okay? So there was this woman, and she prepares a ham for dinner by cutting off both ends of the ham. But one day her bewildered husband asks like why she cuts off both ends of this ham. And she replies, that's how my mom cooked it. And so he says, well, it just so happened that her mom was coming for dinner that night. And so they asked her why she cut off the ends of the ham. And the mom replied, that's how my mom cooked it. And so they decided to call grandma on the phone and ask her why she cut off the ends of the ham, because the grandma had done it and the mom had done it and then the new mom had done it. They were always cutting off the ends of the ham. The grandma says because her pan was too small. Because her pan was too small. I mean, like now the new mom has a freaking giant oven. The old mom had a giant oven. But the grandma had this little pan, and so she would cut off the ends. And others would blindly follow her because that's what they grew up with. They always grew up with the ends cut off the ham. That's what they were used to. That was their tradition. That was their basis. That was their mentality. But in reality, it was self-destructive. They were wasting tons of food. There was no reason to do that. But they did it anyway, because they didn't take a minute to just think about it. And so some of the actions that you might subconsciously be modeling right now might be very, very simple. They might be very, very basic. They might be something as simple as my mom. She would always carry, and my dad, he would always, like both of them, mostly my dad, would carry like tons of cash around. Just like spare cash for like no reason. And I guess it kind of depends on like your set point, how much wealth you have. But for a lot of people, if you just have a lot of money sitting in your wallet, like eventually you're just gonna like have a natural tendency to spend it because you have it and there's nothing else you're gonna do with it. So you just start to whisk it away, and that's something I struggled with for a while because I was like modeling my parents. And then I realized like, you don't have to do the same thing as the people you grew up around. You don't have to always cut off the edge of the ham if you're in a different situation where you have different circumstances, where you have maybe a bigger oven, where you have sort of less of a need to just randomly spend tons of money on stuff. So I started carrying around just a 20 in case I ran out of gas or something, and that was that. And all of a sudden, like I was wasting way less money and investing way more money by simply changing that behavior because I took a moment to recognize it and say, I'm gonna make a shift, I'm gonna make a change, I'm gonna do something differently than what I'm used to. And it was a very, very simple change, but it was one that required one thing. It was one that required acknowledgement. You gotta take a minute and sort of zoom out and step back and think about like what's actually going on and how, is that gonna make an impact? How is that gonna change? How is that gonna affect it? Wrecker, his dad was an entrepreneur, and he was in sort of the home building business, and he would build anywhere from a dozen to 100 projects per month, and every single project took a huge amount of capital investment. And so his dad would have to put up everything that they had and borrow heavily from the bank till the homes were sold and the cash came through. So consequently, at the beginning of each project, they had no money and they were in debt up to their eyes. And during this period, The dad was not in really great moods. He was not generous. He was a little bit on the edge. And if Ecker asked him for anything that cost even a penny, he would always say, what do you think I made of? Like, he would say, like, there's no money. You can't do that. It's not possible. I'm not made of money. Crap like that. And, Ecker wouldn't get a dime. And he would say, his dad would be like, don't even think of asking me that again. And it was a really negative, destructive situation. A bad action, a bad environment to be in. And this scenario lasts for about a year or two until the home was finally sold. And then they would be rolling in dough. They would have tons of money. And all of a sudden, his dad was a different person. And he would be happy, kind, and extremely generous. And he would come over and he would ask if he needed a couple bucks. And he was just, he felt like giving him his stare back. But he wasn't that stupid. He said, sure, thanks, and rolled his eyes. And so he would get tons of money. He would have tons of abundance. There'd be tons of sharing, and life would be phenomenal after they had that deal, after they sold that home. Until that dreaded day when he'd come home and announce that he found a good piece of land and that they're gonna go build again. And, he'd say, great, good luck. But in his heart, like, Ecker sank, knowing that sort of this repetitive cycle of struggle was gonna happen again. And this pattern lasted from literally the time I could remember, when he was about 6 years old, to the age of 21 when he moved out of his parents' house for good. And then it stopped, or so Ecker thought. He thought that because he was away from the individuals that had this really destructive, like, poverty, rich mindset and cyclical money management strategy, that he would be separate from. He would be different, and he would be in a separate land where he could just have abundant money all over the place. And he finished school and he became a builder, and then he went on to several other kind of like project-based businesses where it was like, the value that you give through the projects determines your income. And for some strange reason, he would make a small fortune, and then a short time later he'd be broke. And then he'd get into another business and believe he was on top of the world again, hit it, make it huge, make a ton of money, and a year later he'd hit rock bottom. The up and down pattern went on for nearly 10 years. If you think about this as like his bank account, right? Not necessarily because of him, but just because of the mentalities. The value, right? You'd make tons and tons and tons. You would have so much money. And then he would go broke. And it went up and down and up and down and up and down for decades, until he realized that maybe the problem wasn't the type of business he was choosing, the patterns he was choosing, the employees he had, the state of the economy, or his decision to take time off and relax when things were going well. And he finally recognized that maybe, just maybe, he was unconsciously reliving his dad's experiences. And his dad's up and down income pattern. Because he understood that, and he realized that he was yo-yoing up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And all he had to do was make this simple shift and say, instead of going like this, why don't I just go up and then keep going up, then keep going up, then keep going up. And instead of saying like, we're gonna quit everything and stop working and not do anything at the top, all he had to do is make a simple shift and say, let's just keep on going, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. And he made the mental decision to stop doing this and instead have consistent growth over time. And all it was for him was, again, a decision to stop doing what wasn't really working for him and instead do what he actually wanted to do to have that consistent growth. It all came down to his choice to say, look, that's not me. I'm gonna be my own thing. I'm gonna do my own thing. And I'm gonna have success. And I know that there's nothing at fault here. There's no responsibility for my own wealth or the success of my companies or myself, except for myself. And he took full responsibility, and it led to a really phenomenal result. It changed everything for him, and he got onto that consistent path of growth because he went away from what wasn't working, and he moved towards his ideal future, which was really powerful. And as soon as you make that decision, it's all uphill from there because you have that end goal that you're working towards. You have that upside that you can achieve, and you understand that there are people that you can model to get there, and all you have to do is follow the process and continue to apply what you're doing. He already knew so much stuff, but the thing is, it was latent. It was just sitting in his mind. It was information that wasn't being applied because he wasn't mentally used to applying it. And so all he started to do was apply it, and then he made way more money, and he kept way more money because he decided that he was gonna have his own mindset, his own blueprint, his own money, management technique. And so that's sort of the big key concept here, is understand that no matter where you're coming from, no matter what you've seen, you can have a complete and total abundance of wealth, and all you have to do is make the mental decision to do so. The mental decision, especially if you have a negative experience, negative past, to cut off the crap and instead focus almost exclusively on the positive growth, positive mindset, positive development you can have, and you make that simple shift, and it's all upwards from there, and you can start to apply everything we're going to learn once we get more and more into the coaching program, this idea of assets and investing. Once you start to apply that, like, you can actually keep that money and have it grow and compound over time. And that's the big takeaway. That's the big message. And it's really critical and really core. So definitely awesome that you're going through that. Make sure, take a moment now and think. Like, take 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Just think. If there are any experiences that you kind of had growing up, and then go through the same process of sort of eradicating those from your mind and understanding that you don't have to follow the stigma. You don't have to follow what broke people are doing. You can actually achieve that success with your own dedication, okay? So that's the big message for here. Hope you get a ton of value out of this module. Go there, apply it, absolutely crush it, and I will see you in the next module. Thank you. Bye.